Scary telling.
As I stood on the street corner with my friend, Bob, we noticed a strange toad making its way down Verboldesham Road. At first, it seemed harmless, but as it approached, we noticed the enormous size of its teeth. Suddenly, the toad devoured Mrs. Carstairs from across the street, and we could hear the bones crunching in its mouth. Despite the terrifying scene before us, Bob and I didn't feel afraid. In fact, we couldn't quite place the feeling that had taken over us. It was as if the toad had cast a spell of boredom and mundaneness upon us. We watched as it crushed a Studebaker with its paws, but it didn't seem frightening at all. As we continued to watch the toad's behavior, we noticed that it seemed almost bored with its own destruction. It was as if it had no other purpose than to spread its aura of boredom and mundaneness to everything around it. Bob and I exchanged worried glances, but we couldn't quite understand what was happening. The toad continued its rampage down the street, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. As the toad approached us, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of detachment. It was almost as if I was watching everything happen from a distance, and the toad's aura of boredom and mundaneness was affecting me too. Bob and I tried to back away slowly, but the toad was too quick. It lunged at us, baring its enormous teeth, and I could feel the fear rising in my chest. But then, just as quickly as it had attacked, the toad lost interest and wandered away down the street. Bob and I exchanged a look of confusion and disbelief. What was happening? Why didn't we feel afraid? And why did the toad seem so mundane and uninterested in its own destruction? As we watched the toad disappear down the street, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Something about the situation didn't feel right, and I knew that there was much more to this toad than met the eye. Bob and I couldn't shake the feeling of detachment and boredom that had taken hold of us since we witnessed the toad's arrival. It was as if we were stuck in a perpetual state of disinterest, unable to feel anything other than a sense of apathy. We soon realized that we weren't alone. The people around us were also affected by the toad's aura of boredom and mundaneness. The streets were quiet, and people went about their business with a sense of detachment and disinterest. Bob and I tried to resist the toad's power, but it was increasingly difficult. The more we fought it, the stronger it seemed to become. It was like a thick fog that had settled over the entire town, affecting everyone in its path. We watched in horror as the toad continued its rampage down the street, destroying everything in its path. But as it did so, it seemed almost bored with its own destruction. It was as if it had no other purpose than to spread its aura of boredom and mundaneness to everything around it. Bob and I tried to rally the people around us, but they were all too affected by the boredom and disinterest to take action. Even the police seemed unable to break free from the toad's spell, and they watched as the toad continued its destruction. As the days went by, the situation became increasingly dire. The toad's power was spreading, affecting more and more people. Bob and I knew that we had to do something to stop it, but we didn't know where to begin. One night, as we sat in my living room, we heard a knock at the door. It was a man we didn't recognize, and he seemed to be unaffected by the toad's aura of boredom and mundaneness. He introduced himself as a scientist and explained that he had been studying the toad and its strange powers. He believed that the toad was emitting a type of energy that affected people's brains, causing them to feel disinterested and detached from the world around them. The scientist had developed a device that could disrupt the toad's energy field, but he needed our help to deploy it. He believed that if they could disrupt the toad's energy field, they could break the spell that it had cast upon the town. Bob and I were hesitant, but we knew that it was our only chance to stop the toad's rampage. We agreed to help the scientist, and he gave us the device, explaining how it worked and where to deploy it. The next day, we set out to deploy the device. As we made our way down the street, we noticed that the toad seemed to sense our presence. It turned towards us, its eyes boring into ours, and we could feel its power growing stronger. But we didn't give up. We continued to move forward, deploying the device as we went. And as we did so, we could feel the toad's power beginning to weaken. Its aura of boredom and mundaneness began to dissipate, and we could feel ourselves coming back to life. Finally, the toad collapsed, defeated. The scientist explained that the disruption of its energy field had caused it to lose its power, and it had returned to its natural state. As we looked around, we could see that the town was beginning to come back to life. People were smiling, talking, and going about their business with renewed energy and interest. Bob and I exchanged a look of relief and gratitude, knowing that we had played a part in freeing the town from the toad's spell. After defeating the toad's aura of boredom and mundaneness, things seemed to be returning to normal. The town was no longer under the toad's influence, and people were going about their business with renewed energy and interest. However, our sense of relief was short-lived. One day, as Bob and I were walking down Sham Road, we heard a loud rumbling noise. We turned around to see that the street was collapsing, and the buildings were beginning to crumble. We could hear people screaming and shouting as they ran for cover. The toad, we realized, had caused the collapse. Its rampage had left the street unstable, and now it was all coming apart. Bob and I knew we had to do something to stop the toad's destruction. We ran towards the source of the rumbling, determined to put an end to the chaos. As we approached the crumbling buildings, we could see the toad in the distance. It was destroying everything in its path, and we could hear the sound of glass breaking and metal twisting as it continued its rampage. We knew we had to act fast. We had to find a way to stop the toad before it caused any more damage. But as we made our way towards it, we could feel the ground beneath us trembling. We knew that time was running out. Finally, we reached the toad. It was enormous, with teeth the size of our arms. Its eyes bore into ours, and we could feel its aura of boredom and mundaneness affecting us once again. But this time, we were ready. We had the scientist's device with us, and we knew that it was our only chance to stop the toad's destruction. We activated the device, and the toad's energy field began to fluctuate. As the toad lost its power, it began to shrink. Its teeth grew smaller, and its eyes lost their intensity. Finally, it collapsed, defeated once and for all. As we watched the toad disintegrate, we knew that the threat was over. The town was safe, and the people were no longer under the toad's spell. But as we looked around, we realized the extent of the damage. The street was in ruins, and many buildings were destroyed. It was a long road to recovery, but we knew that we had to start somewhere. Bob and I looked at each other, knowing that we had been through something extraordinary. We had faced a monster that had threatened to destroy our town, and we had emerged victorious. As we made our way back to our homes, we could feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. We had saved our town, and we knew that we would never forget the toad and the havoc that it had caused. As Bob and I were basking in our victory over the toad, we heard a strange noise in the distance. It sounded like a low hum, almost like a vibration. We turned towards the source of the noise and saw that the ground was trembling. We knew immediately that the toad was back, and it was more powerful than ever. As we made our way towards the toad, we could feel its aura of boredom and mundaneness affecting us once again. But this time, we were determined not to let it defeat us. We had learned from our previous encounters with the toad, and we knew that the scientist's device was the key to defeating it once and for all. We had to use it to disrupt the toad's energy field and weaken its power. As we approached the toad, we could see that it had grown even larger than before. Its teeth were longer, and its eyes glowed with an intense light. We knew that this was going to be our toughest challenge yet. We activated the device, and the toad's energy field began to fluctuate. But this time, it wasn't enough. The toad seemed to be more powerful than ever, and it was resisting the device's effects. As the toad began to advance towards us, we knew that we had to come up with a new plan. We decided to distract the toad and attack it from behind, hoping to catch it off guard. We split up, and I made my way towards the toad's back while Bob ran towards its front. As I approached the toad, I could feel its aura of boredom and mundaneness affecting me even more strongly. But I pushed through the feeling and activated the device once again. The toad's energy field began to fluctuate once more, and I knew that we were making progress. Bob and I attacked the toad from both sides, hoping to weaken it further. But as we attacked, we could feel the toad's power growing stronger. Suddenly, the ground beneath us began to shake violently. We knew that something was wrong. The toad had one more trick up its sleeve. As we looked up, we saw that the toad had grown even larger. Its teeth were enormous, and its eyes glowed with an intense light. We knew that we were in trouble, but we didn't give up. We knew that we had to keep fighting, no matter what. We continued to attack the toad with all our might, hoping that it would weaken eventually. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the toad began to shrink. Its energy field began to fluctuate, and we knew that we had won. The toad collapsed, defeated once and for all. As we looked around, we could see that the town was safe once again. The people were no longer under the toad's spell, and the street had been rebuilt. Bob and I looked at each other, knowing that we had been through something extraordinary. We had faced a monster that had threatened to destroy our town, and we had emerged victorious. As we made our way back to our homes, we could feel a sense of relief and pride. We had saved our town, and we knew that we would never forget the toad and the havoc that it had caused. After the final confrontation with the toad, Bob and I were hailed as heroes. The town held a celebration in our honor, and people came from all around to thank us for saving them from the toad's destruction. But even as we basked in our newfound fame, we couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. We knew that the toad had been defeated, but we also knew that there was much we didn't understand about its powers. We began to research the toad's energy field, hoping to understand how it had been able to affect the town so deeply. We pored over scientific papers and consulted with experts, trying to unlock the mystery of the toad's aura of boredom and mundaneness. As we dug deeper, we began to uncover some disturbing truths. It seemed that the toad had been created by a government agency as part of a secret program to develop new forms of psychological warfare. The toad's energy field was designed to induce feelings of disinterest and detachment in its targets, making them more susceptible to propaganda and manipulation. And while the program had been abandoned years ago, the toad had somehow escaped and made its way to our town. Bob and I were shocked by what we had learned. We had always suspected that there was more to the toad than met the eye, but we never imagined that it was part of a government program. As we continued to research, we began to understand the full scope of the toad's power. It wasn't just a simple monster, it was a weapon designed to be used against the enemy. We knew that we had to do something to prevent this from happening again. We contacted the government agency responsible for the program and demanded that they take responsibility for their actions. To our surprise, they agreed. They promised to dismantle the program and ensure that nothing like the toad was ever created again. Bob and I felt a sense of relief and satisfaction knowing that we had helped to bring about change. We had defeated the toad and exposed the truth behind its creation. As we looked around at the rebuilt town and the smiling faces of the people, we knew that we had done something good. We had faced a monster that threatened to destroy our town, and we had emerged victorious. But we also knew that there would always be new threats and new monsters to face. And we were ready for whatever came next.